We wait for Nathan Kline to call in. He is the Green Party nominee for the U.S. Senate race, and we'll wait for him. And there he is, just like magic. And so we'll bring him on as we are once again discussing the U.S. Senate race. And Mr. Kline, thank you for calling in.
Hi, Tony.
Hey, we had a great conversation yesterday talking about it. I'll be the first to admit I don't know much about the Green Party as much as I should, so I apologize to you. Take a few minutes. Talk to us about the platform of the Green Party.
The first thing to understand about the Green Party is the only significant party with nationwide ballot access in this country for a number of generations that refuses all corporate donations. We don't take money from billionaires. We don't take money from multinational corporations. That's the core principle that makes the Green Party very different than the other parties that have basically crafted a pay-to-play political system in our country and sold our democracy to the highest bidder. Green Party is run by volunteers like myself in state parties and local chapters. And, we volunteer our time because we're concerned that our democracy has been degraded to, almost completely. We mostly have what you call a plutocracy at this point, ruled by a small number of wealthy individuals, much like we had at the time of the American Revolution. We work as Green Party volunteers to provide candidates like myself that are, just regular working people that refuse all donations, that offer to be public servants of the people from the districts that we're elected from, never, ever take checks from wealthy donors that want to determine where our tax investments go. We believe, as I think most Americans do, that the only people that should be listened to by our elected officials when they decide those things are the people that are their voters, their constituents. Mm-hmm. And we know that that's not what's happening.
One of the things that I've talked about with several candidates, several elected officials, I think there's a movement in this country, a general sentiment that we're getting tired of the current tax system. It feels that we're continually being taxed. Money is continually being, of course, spent on several different programs. How would you look to change the tax system that we currently have? And of course, that would also lead to a reduction in spending, hopefully. Well,
the number one thing, many of these things I'm talking about, I'm not telling people things they don't know.
Yes.
We've had over the last few generations a profound shift in the tax burden in our country from the wealthiest Americans to like working class, middle class Americans. We all know at this point that the wealthiest among us, multinational corporations and the billionaires, aren't paying their fair share of taxes anymore, and many of them are paying no taxes at all. Yet they, like I said, are determining where our tax investments go, and how much taxes we pay and who pays them. Mm-hmm. Again, the only people that should be determining that is us voters. A pay-to-play political system has been crafted to cut us out of those conversations. Our priorities, I think, are very different. My priorities, and I think most of your listeners' priorities, are going to be very different. These are kitchen table bread and butter issues. We're all fine to pay our fair share, but we expect a good return on that investment, right? The biggest pot of money in the world is the U.S. tax base. There's plenty of resources there to take care of all of the problems that we see in our country. And we just have the wrong priorities because we're not being listened to. And that's why I'm running. That's what the Green Party is all about, is changing that dynamic. We don't think that it's a left-right thing. We don't think it's a conservative-liberal thing. We think it's a democracy thing. I've been out on the street corners of my community talking to Missourians, and Green Party candidates. Volunteers have been doing that for a number of years to get us back on the ballot in Missouri. I can talk about that whole process, which is challenging as well. Mm-hmm. And I've been talking to people of all demographic backgrounds, and across the board. What I'm talking about is in the mouths of conservative Missourians, liberal Missourians, old Missourians, young Missourians, Missourians of all races and backgrounds. We're just not sure how we're going to get past the corporate consensus that has bought our political system. And the Green Party is trying to innovate a strategy to do that. We think that if Americans of all political stripes stop voting for candidates that take the corporate money, they can take the corporate money. We're the only country in the world that allows for the full legalized bribery of our elected officials at this point. The only way that we're going to overcome that is all of us refuse to vote for candidates, whatever comes out of their mouth, that take that corporate money, because they don't serve us when they get in office. We all see that, and consider only voting for candidates like myself that are going to be public servants and aren't taking that money. We can have an American political revolution, a democratic revolution, not violent. We don't want that. No. We want an off-ramp, because we see that coming too, right? If, like John F. Kennedy said, if you don't allow nonviolent revolution, violent revolution is inevitable. And he was correct on that. The Green Party is trying to craft a nonviolent, and that means electoral, solution to this problem. Because if we can't craft that nonviolent electoral solution, I'm afraid that we're going to descend back into American Civil War. And the last time we had a civil war in this country, more Americans died in that conflict than in all other conflicts combined, by far. But we have a lot more firepower now. It's going to be a lot worse than it was 150 years ago.
Mr. Kline, one of the issues that let's just say everyday people. We've talked about the corporations. We've talked about big business, but life for most of us is just middle class people like myself. Right now, inflation has really hurt us. Prices have really hurt us. The prices on food, everyday items that we can't live without. I'm just going to lay it out there to you. If the price of gas would go back down to $1.50 and food goes back down to the prices that it was before this inflation, my life is pretty good. I think I can make it. But for a lot of families out there, it's very difficult to put food on the table. How does a U.S. senator work with the other senators that are elected to make sure life is better, that food prices come down, gasoline prices come down?
Well, I think the best way to illustrate, what we can do instead of what's being done, which is nothing. Okay,
seems like nothing.
The Democrats and Republicans are united on almost everything. They act like they're far apart, but they really are united on everything. And inflation is illustrative of that. Basically, they say we're not going to do anything. We're going to let whatever the market does to happen, because the market's a magic trick that is perfect every time. Now, we know that's not the case. The market is very dynamic, very creative, but when you get into a monopoly type of market like we have now, especially when it hijacks our democracy, the market is not responsive. It's very much like the market that we saw at the time of the American Revolution. And, it wasn't that long ago that American politicians were actually very responsive to these type of inflationary pressures that average consumers like ourselves have. the last time we had inflation like this in our country was during the Nixon administration. In 1970, Richard Nixon, who was an avid anti-communist, we're not talking about some socialist here, right? He was McCarthy's right-hand man in the 1950s in the communist witch hunts, right? In 1970, when we last saw inflation like this, Richard Nixon issued an executive order putting a price freeze on every item in this country. He told every business owner in this country that if you raise your prices 1 cent, I will put you in jail. Okay? And he was responding at that point, before our political system was taken over by the multinational corporations and billionaires, to the needs and the hurt and pain of the American citizens. Okay? And so that shows the movement of the Overton window in political responsiveness to the needs of average people. Nobody no elected officials from the Democratic Party or Republican parties are talking about responding in anything like how Richard Nixon responded in 1970. Okay? They are completely not responsive to us and our needs. And we see that. And we can talk about different areas. We can talk about healthcare. We can talk about, public transportation. We can talk about, different areas of our economy that they are not responsive in the same way. But that, this is a very good example of why we need to get money out of politics and have what they're supposed to be our public servants.
Yes.
We need to put public servants for the public back in power, as opposed to they're now a concierge service for their wealthy donors. And that's not the way it's supposed to work. And that's why so many people think that politics is a bad word now. Politics is supposed to be how we get what we need, but it's completely broken because of the way money works in American politics.
But how do we get that? I understand that it is. I agree. Money right now is money is influence. Let's just lay it out there. But to that mom and dad out there that they've got to feed the kids, and they want their kid to be able to play soccer on Saturday. They want their kids to be able to play youth sports. They want to put them in clothes that they won't be embarrassed in, and pay their bills and keep the lights on. Right now, with this inflationary situation that we live in, they're facing 20% higher prices than they did 3 years ago. How do we get that right now? How do we get those prices down? Or are they going to go down?
Well, the only way we're going to do it is by the market won't do it. Okay, if the regulatory agencies, supposed to be our government, won't put certain guidelines, certain guardrails on the market, and say, creative, dynamic market, you can do everything within these guidelines, but we're not going to allow you to gouge the American consumer. Good investigative journalism has been done on the percentage of the inflation that we've seen is the result of, say, increased wages for us working people versus, versus them just using the excuse of inflation to just raise their prices and them just making more profits.
And Mr. Kline, on that note right there, let me take a break right here. We're going to come back. Yep. I would like to talk about national defense. We're speaking with Nathan Kline. He is the Green Party candidate for US Senate. We'll be right back.
Hunting, fishing, and golf. It's Paul Hannigan and Bob Rankin with the Outdoor Show.
Nathan Kline. He is the Green Party nominee for U.S. Senate. And appreciate you holding, sir.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Mr. Kline, we live in a very serious world right now. We have problems at home that we just discussed, but our world is hot now. We have Ukraine. The war in Ukraine continues to drag on. Terrorism seems to find its way back. Of course, Israel right now, they're fighting a war on many fronts. What is the position? What is your position of the world right now?
Well, I think that, over 50% of the federal discretionary funding is now going to the defense budget. This is higher than it's ever been. It's higher than it was during the Cold War. And we have over 800 foreign military bases in the world. Our closest rival, China, has 8 foreign military bases. So we are trying to maintain an empire. Now, I don't know if we want to do that, but it's very expensive to do that. Okay, and we see from history that the maintenance of empires crumbles and at the core, because as you're out there fighting they're wars of choice. Okay, we're out there on other people's borders. They're not on our borders, threatening our borders. We're out on other people's borders, and we are invading other countries. We can argue about whether or not it's the right thing to do or not, but it's certainly very damn expensive. You can look to the Romans, you can look to the English, you can look to the French. The core, you don't have the funding to maintain the home country, okay? And it starts to deteriorate, and we see that very readily. So we have to decide whether or not, we want this funding to come back into our communities. And I think most people, again, I don't think this is a conservative or liberal thing. I think most people want this funding to come back here. And we want to stop the forever wars that are wars of choice. And this is not going to happen from the Democrats and Republicans, who literally, when it comes to defense appropriations, literally compete with each other on who can give the Pentagon more money. They literally give tens of billions of dollars to the Pentagon, more than the Pentagon even asks for. The Pentagon every year says, we'd like to have this much money. And they literally give tens of billions of dollars more than the Pentagon even asks for. And so what they're doing is they're serving their wealthy donors in the military industrial complex, the weapons manufacturers, so who they allow to determine our foreign policy. Basically, our foreign policy is whatever makes weapons manufacturers the most money. Whether or not it's the best thing to do is far below secondary consideration. So
do you believe that Israel's war with Hamas and Hezbollah, do you believe that is a war of choice that the United States is in?
Well, certainly it's a war of choice. Since 1947, let's say since 1967, since the Yom Kippur War, the international community, including the United States, has had multiple demands that Israel retire to its 1947 borders, remove all settlements, which are illegal, and our government considers them still illegal, and that a viable, independent Palestinian state be established alongside Israel, and both countries live next to each other in peace, like the French and the Germans do now, right? The French and the Germans fought each other for generations and generations. And this has been the demand of the international community, including the United States, for generations now. But the United States, by itself, through our veto at the UN Security Council, vetoes any enforcement of this. In late September, the UN voted again overwhelmingly to demand the exact same thing. And the U.S., with just a few vassal states, voted against it, but only the U.S.'s veto stops anything from happening. So yes, it's a war of choice. It's a war. It's a conflict that we continue because we allow Israel to continue to occupy what the world sees as the state next to it, and the Palestinians continue to resist that. Mm-hmm. But the U.S., through our veto, allows this untenable situation to continue generation after generation at this point. And so we're just pouring money down the drain. This conflict should have been ended a long time ago.
How?
But neither the Democrats or the Republicans.
How should it have ended? And I've got like 10 seconds, but how should it have ended quickly?
Well, follow what the UN has demanded, which is set up two viable independent states next door to each other, and Israel to withdraw from the occupied territories.
And we're going to have to end on that note. We're going to have to end on that note. Hey, thank you so much for calling in, sir.
Thank you for having me. Have a wonderful day.
You too. That's Nathan Kline. He is the Green Party nominee for U.S. Senate. We're going to wrap up this Wednesday edition of Morning Magazine. You know, this 10 o'clock hour sponsored